The most dangerous man in Tokyo is sitting alone at a table set for two, and he is 30 seconds from walking out. His name is Kang Ji-won. He controls 6 criminal territories across East Asia, commands 300 soldiers, and has never once in his adult life been kept waiting. Not by rivals, not by politicians, not by anyone. Tonight, a nurse from Atlanta is about to make him wait 28 minutes. And somehow, impossibly, that will be the thing that saves both their lives. This is Shadows of the Dragon Empire. If this story pulls you in, hit like, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because the moment those restaurant windows shatter, nothing will ever be the same. The reservation was under a false name. That was standard. Everything Ji-won did in public was layered behind false names, shell companies, borrowed faces. The restaurant itself, Kesho, 43rd floor of the Shinjuku Grand Tower, crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking a city that never fully slept, had been swept by his security team 3 hours before he arrived. Every server vetted, every exit mapped. The kitchen staff cross-referenced against a database that didn't officially exist. Ji-won sat at the corner table with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, and thought about all the ways this evening was already a waste of his time. He was 34 years old. He had built an empire from a single street corner in Busan when he was 19, bleeding and furious, and with nothing but a name he intended to make mean something. 15 years later, the name meant enough that men flinched when they heard it. His operation moved money through 4 countries, controlled 2 port authorities, and had diplomatic relationships, unofficial, unspoken, expensive, with people whose faces appeared on legitimate television. He did not need a matchmaker. He did not need a blind date arranged by his uncle's business associate's cousin, which was the convoluted chain of obligation that had somehow placed him in this restaurant on a Tuesday night, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He checked the time, 8:23. The reservation had been for 8 o'clock. Across the restaurant, his head of personal security, Park Tae-sung, sat at a separate table with 2 other men, all 3 of them dressed civilian but carrying enough firepower beneath their jackets to hold a small building. Tae-sung was 41, built like something carved rather than born, with a jaw like a concrete block and eyes that were always moving. He caught Ji-won's glance and offered the faintest lift of his chin. A question. Ji-won looked back at the door. 8:24. The maitre d' approached with the practiced glide of someone paid to make discomfort invisible. "Mr. Kang, can I bring you anything while—" "Nothing," the man evaporated. Ji-won's phone sat face down on the white tablecloth. He had 3 unanswered messages from his operations coordinator about a shipment delay in Busan, one from a lawyer in Seoul, and one from his uncle, the architect of this entire evening, that he hadn't opened yet because he already knew what it said. Something about keeping an open mind, something about the future of the family. His uncle was 70 years old and still believed that the right woman could soften a man who had long since decided softness was a liability he couldn't afford. He was reaching for the phone when the restaurant doors opened. She came through them like a controlled disaster. Not dangerous, not threatening, just chaotic in the way that immediately told him she was running on fumes and adrenaline and the particular desperation of someone who had been fighting a losing battle against time for the last several hours. She was wearing scrubs, dark blue, slightly wrinkled, with a faint stain near the left pocket that she'd made an attempt to blot out and only partially succeeded. Her hair was pulled back in a style that had started the day neat and was now surviving rather than thriving. She was scanning the restaurant with the tight, focused look of someone who expected to find a problem and was already pre-apologizing for it. She was, objectively, the least dressed person in a room full of people wearing things that cost thousands of dollars. She spotted him, or rather, spotted the corner table where a man sat alone in a dark suit with an expression that would have made most people reconsider their life choices. And something shifted in her face. Not embarrassment exactly, more like the specific exhaustion of someone who has already used up their emotional reserves and is now operating on a kind of stripped-down honesty. She crossed the restaurant without hesitating. Ji-won watched her come. He noticed the way she walked, not tentative, not performatively confident, just direct. A person who moved through spaces like she had somewhere to be and a reason to be there. He noticed the stain on the pocket again. He noticed that she wasn't wearing any jewelry. He noticed that she looked at him the way most people looked at a difficult patient, with full attention and no awe whatsoever. She stopped at the table. "You're G1." Not a question. Her voice was lower than he'd expected, and flat with tiredness in a way that stripped all the social coding off the words. American accent, southern edge to it, softened by years somewhere else. "Yes, I'm Zariah." She pulled out the chair across from him and sat down without waiting to be invited, which was either very rude or very confident, and he hadn't decided yet which one. "I'm 28 minutes late, and I look like I just fought a war in a hospital corridor, which I basically did. And I completely understand if you want to end this right now. I won't be offended." Jiwon looked at her for a moment. "Do you want to eat?" he said. Something moved across her face, small, quick, like she'd braced for something and it hadn't come. "Yeah," she said. "Yeah, I could eat." He signaled the server. Her name was Zariah Bennett. She was 26, originally from Atlanta, currently working as a registered nurse at Shinjuku Memorial Hospital on a 2-year international placement program. She had been in Tokyo for 14 months. She had agreed to this evening because her attending physician, a Korean-Japanese woman named Dr. Yoon, who apparently knew Jiwon's uncle through some chain of professional and social connection that Zariah hadn't fully untangled, had spent 3 weeks telling her that she worked too hard and lived too narrowly and that she was going to be 40 before she knew it and regret never having taken any risks. She told him all of this in approximately 4 minutes while eating bread, because she was genuinely starving. "You agreed to a blind date because your boss told you to take risks," Jiwon said. "I agreed to a blind date because my boss is relentless and I was tired of saying no." She looked at him directly. "Why did you agree?" He considered the honest answer. The honest answer was obligation and the path of least resistance. The honest answer was that his uncle had leverage, not criminal leverage, just the specific leverage of a man who had been more of a father to him than his actual father, and who had asked for very little over the years, and who had asked for this. The honest answer was that Jiwon had agreed to show up, sit for 1 hour, and then leave with the ability to tell his uncle he had tried. "My uncle asked me to," he said. She nodded like that made complete sense. Family pressure, same energy. The food came. She ordered without looking at the prices, which he noticed, and she ate with the focused efficiency of someone who had been running on coffee and vending machine snacks for the last 12 hours. She asked him what he did, and he told her international logistics and asset management, which was the cover that had been professionally maintained for 11 years, and which was, in the most technical sense, not entirely false. She told him about her work, the 14-hour shifts, the language barrier she was still grinding through, the particular loneliness of being one of the only black women in her department, the strange beauty of Tokyo at 4 in the morning when she walked home after a night shift and the city was just light and silence. He listened to her talk about Tokyo at 4 in the morning and felt something unfamiliar move through him. Not attraction exactly, though she was, objectively, striking in a way that had nothing to do with the situation and everything to do with the particular quality of her face when she was being honest. It was something quieter, the sensation of someone speaking with no performance in it. No angling, no reading of the room, and adjusting accordingly. In his world, everyone angled, everyone read the room. "You've been here 14 months, he said. "You're not lonely?" "I'm working too hard to notice most of the time." She looked at him. "Are you?" "Am I what?" "Lonely." The question landed with a directness that should have been offensive and somehow wasn't. He looked at her for a moment. Across the restaurant, he was peripherally aware of Tae-sung shifting in his chair, a small movement, the kind that meant Tae-sung had noticed something and was processing it. "That's not a first date question," Jiwon said. "I'm a nurse. I skipped the small talk. People tell me things they've never told anyone within about 10 minutes because I look like I'm actually listening." She picked up her water glass. "You don't have to answer." He was about to say something. He didn't know what. Something neutral, something that closed the door, when the window behind her exploded inward. The sound was enormous. Not a pop, not a crack. A full detonation of glass, a wall of it. And with it came the cold night air and 3 men in dark clothing already moving, already with weapons raised, already screaming in Korean for everyone to get down, don't move. The restaurant detonated into panic. Chairs scraping, people screaming, someone hitting the floor, a woman by the bar going down hard with her hands over her head. The chandeliers shook. Glass covered every table in the section by the window, and the cold air hit the room like a fist. Ji-won was already moving before the first scream finished. He was out of his chair and around the table in a single motion, putting himself between Zaraya and the room, one hand on her shoulder, driving her down below the table line. His other hand was reaching for what wasn't there. He was unarmed tonight, a decision made for optics, for the fiction of a normal man on a normal date. And that absence registered in his chest like a missing step in the dark. Tae-sung and his men were already up. The three attackers had come through the window on cables, a professional entry, planned, not improvised, and they were moving through the screaming restaurant with the particular efficiency of men who had been given a specific objective. Not robbery. The way they moved told him that immediately. They weren't sweeping the room, they were converging on a point, on him. The first attacker reached Ji-won's overturned table in 3 seconds and found Tae-sung's forearm across his throat in the fourth. The man went down hard against the marble floor. The second attacker raised a blade, not a gun, which was interesting, which meant they had wanted this quiet. And Ji-won caught his wrist with both hands, turned his body, used the man's own momentum to drive him into the nearest pillar with a crack that bounced off the crystal ceiling. The third man went for Zaraya. She had not run. That was the thing. Everyone else in the restaurant was scrambling for exits, shouting, pushing, the human animal running from danger the way it always did. And Zaraya Bennett was crouched behind the overturned table with her hands up and her eyes tracking, not frozen, calculating. When the third attacker came around the table, she threw her body sideways, grabbed the heavy ceramic water pitcher off the floor, and swung it into the side of his head with both hands and no hesitation. The man staggered, went to one knee. Tae-sung's second man put him down the rest of the way. 15 seconds. The whole thing had taken 15 seconds. The restaurant was a devastation of glass and overturned furniture and people pressed against walls or flat on the floor. The chandeliers were still moving. Somewhere behind the bar, something had shattered. A bottle, maybe several, and the smell of alcohol mixed with the cold air pouring through the broken window. Ji-won was breathing hard. He turned to look at Zaraya. She was on her feet. There was a cut on her forearm, shallow, from flying glass, and she was looking at it with the clinical detachment of someone who had assessed 10,000 wounds before this one. Then she looked up and past him, and her expression changed. "There's someone on the floor," she said. "That waiter, he's—" Ji-won turned. 12 feet away, one of the young servers, a kid, maybe 20, in the white jacket of the restaurant staff, was down on his side near the hostess stand with one hand pressed against his abdomen and blood spreading between his fingers with the particular speed that meant something serious. One of the attackers, during the chaos, had gotten a blade into him. The kid's face was the color of paper. Everyone else was still moving away from the room. Zaraya was already moving toward it. "Stop!" Ji-won started. She didn't stop. She crossed the wreckage of the restaurant at a half run and dropped to her knees beside the wounded server before anyone else in the room had processed what was happening. Her hands were already moving, pressure on the wound, 2 fingers at his neck, eyes scanning his face with a rapid, focused precision that had nothing amateur about it. "I need something clean," she said loudly, not to anyone specific, to the room. "Cloth, towel, anything, now." One of Tae-sung's men, the younger one, Kwon, looked at Ji-won. Ji-won nodded. Kwon pulled his own jacket off and crossed to her. Ji-won walked to her slowly, watching her work. She had the kid's hand moved away from the wound and her own hands pressing down with exactly the right pressure. And she was talking to him in a low, continuous voice. Not panicked, not performative, just steady, while her eyes kept moving over him in a rapid clinical survey. She took Kwon's jacket without looking up and folded it in 3 movements and pressed it down harder. "He needs a hospital," she said. How fast can you get him one?" "My men will handle it." "How fast?" 8 minutes. "That's okay." She looked up at Ji-won for a second, and her face had a quality to it that he hadn't seen before, stripped of everything except function. No fear, no performance, just the full concentrated weight of someone who had decided this person in front of her was going to live and was doing the work to make that true. 8 minutes is okay. He needs to not move. Keep him still and keep this pressure. She guided Kwan's hands to replace hers, walked him through the pressure point twice until she was sure he had it, then stood up. Her hands were bloody. She looked at them for a moment. Then she looked at Ji-won. "Who were those men?" she said. It wasn't really a question. It was the sound of someone who already knew the answer wasn't going to be simple and was deciding whether to ask for it anyway. "Not here," Ji-won said. She looked around the restaurant. The police would be here in minutes. His men had already melted the 3 attackers out through the service exit. They were gone. They would be processed. They would talk whether they wanted to or not. The restaurant staff were on phones. Someone near the window was crying. The beautiful room was destroyed. "The camera above the bar," Ji-won said quietly. "It caught your face when you came in. The one in the lobby did too." She looked at him. "Whoever sent those men will have that footage within the hour," he said, "which means they will know exactly who you are." He watched her process that, watched her understand the architecture of what he was telling her, that by being here, by being seen, by sitting across from him for 40 minutes while cameras recorded her face, she had stepped into something she couldn't step back out of. "You're saying I'm not safe," she said. "I'm saying you need to come with me tonight." "I don't know you." "No." He looked at her steadily. "You don't." Outside, the first police sirens were beginning their approach through the Shinjuku streets, cutting through the city noise like a blade. Inside the ruined restaurant, Zariah Bennett stood with blood drying on her hands and looked at the most dangerous man she had ever met in her life and understood, with a clarity that had nothing to do with logic and everything to do with the specific instinct that had kept her alive through 14 months of Tokyo alone, that he was telling her the truth. The sirens got closer. "Where would we go?" she said. "Somewhere safe." "Safe for who?" Ji-won looked at her for a long moment. "For you." She was quiet for 3 seconds. Behind her, the young server was breathing in short, careful pulls, Kwan's hands holding the pressure, Taesung already on a phone coordinating the extraction. The police were 3 minutes out. The window poured cold air across the wreckage of an evening that had started as an obligation and had become something else entirely. 5 minutes, she said. "I'm going to need 5 minutes." He nodded. She went to the server, checked the wound again, repositioned the pressure, spoke to Kwan in the quiet, precise way she had, not commanding, just certain, and told him exactly what to tell the paramedics when they arrived. She washed her hands in the service sink behind the bar. She found her bag under the overturned table and slung it over her shoulder. Then she came back to Ji-won. "Okay," she said. They went out through the kitchen. The penthouse was on the 38th floor of a building in Akasaka that, from the outside, presented as a luxury residential tower, but was, in reality, a structure that Ji-won's organization had quietly acquired 3 years ago, and which served as his primary Tokyo residence and, when necessary, a secure holding position. The security was embedded in the architecture: reinforced glass, monitored perimeter, the 2 men in the lobby who looked like residents but weren't, the additional 2 on the roof. Zariah stood at the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city and said nothing for a long time. Ji-won poured water, set it on the low table near the couch. He'd rolled his sleeve up to look at his arm, a cut, not serious, from the initial attack, and was pressing a clean cloth against it with the mechanical efficiency of a man who had treated his own injuries more times than he could count. She turned from the window, looked at his arm. Something shifted in her professional instinct. He could see it, the automatic response of someone who couldn't look at a wound and not want to address it. "Let me see," she said. "It's fine." "Let me see." He looked at her. Then he sat down on the couch and held out his arm. She sat across from him, took his arm in both hands, and examined the cut with the same focused attention she'd given everything else that night. Up close, with the penthouse lights clean and steady around them, she could see more of him than the dim restaurant had allowed. The tattoos that covered his forearms and disappeared under his rolled sleeves, elaborate and dark, the kind that were earned rather than decorative. A faint scar along his left jaw. The set of his face, not handsome in any easy way, but structured, architectural, The face of someone who had decided long ago exactly who he was and stopped negotiating with it. "This needs cleaning," she said. "There's a kit in the bathroom, second cabinet." She came back with it, sat down again, and worked on the cut in silence. Her hands were steady and efficient and impersonal, clinical. And then, without looking up, "Tell me what I'm in the middle of." Jiwon was quiet for a moment. Outside, Tokyo spread its light to every horizon. "My organization controls logistics through 5 East Asian ports," he said. "A rival syndicate, Korean, based out of Busan, has been attempting to take 2 of those ports for 18 months. Tonight was a message. A message. Sent to me. Through the restaurant. They knew where you'd be." "Yes." She finished cleaning the cut and began to dress it with the efficient movements of long practice. "Who told them?" "I don't know yet." "Is that normal, not knowing who told them?" "No." She looked up at him then. Her eyes were very direct, dark brown, steady, with something in them that wasn't fear and wasn't naivety, just clarity. The specific clarity of someone who dealt with emergencies for a living and had learned to look at a situation without flinching. "So there's someone inside your organization," she said, "passing information." "Possibly. And that same someone may have seen me on that camera footage." He held her gaze. "Yes." She sat back, looked at her hands, looked at the city. "I have a shift tomorrow at 6, she said. "You can't go back to the hospital yet." Something moved across her face. The first real frustration she'd shown, jagged and human. "I have patients." "I know. People who are depending on me to be there." "I know." He said it without apology, which was honest. There was no good version of this. "I'll have someone contact the hospital." "What are they going to say?" "Family emergency. A flight out of the country tonight. Whatever keeps you off the schedule for the next 72 hours while we—" "While you what?" Her voice had an edge to it now. "Figure out who inside your organization is selling information about you. Manage whatever war is apparently happening around you. What am I supposed to do while that's happening? Sit in your penthouse and wait?" "Yes." She stared at him. "I know how that sounds," he said. "Do you? You'd rather hear something comfortable." He looked at her evenly. "I don't have anything comfortable. You were in the wrong place. I can keep you safe here, or I can put you back in the city, and you will have a security detail on you that you won't see, but that won't be enough if they decide to use you as leverage. Those are the options." The city lights held still outside the glass. Somewhere far below, Tokyo was being ordinary. Traffic and restaurants and people walking home from work. And up here, the air was very clean and very quiet. Zariah looked at him for a long time. "You didn't run," he said. It came out quieter than he'd intended. "What?" "In the restaurant, every other person in that room ran. You went toward the wounded man." She was quiet. "I've worked with soldiers," he said. "Professionals. Men who trained for years. Half of them would have run from a room like that tonight." He looked at her steadily. "You didn't." "I'm a nurse," she said. "Running toward the problem is the job." "Maybe." He stood, moved to the window, looked out at the city he'd spent 15 years building his empire across. "But it's also a choice." "It's always a choice." She was quiet for a long time after that. He didn't press her. He stood at the window and let the city be the city. And let her think. When she spoke again, her voice had changed. Still tired, still the honest, flat American voice with the Atlanta underneath it. But something resolute in it now, something that had moved through the shock and landed somewhere harder. "I need my phone." "Of course. And I need to know that if I make calls, to my colleagues, to my supervisor, no one on your end is listening to those calls." He turned from the window. "You have my word." She looked at him like she was taking the measure of what that was worth. Then she nodded. A single decisive nod that told him she'd made a decision and intended to hold to it. 72 hours, she said. Then we reassess. Agreed. She picked up her bag. Looked around the penthouse. The clean lines of it. The controlled elegance. The total absence of anything personal or warm or human. Like a room that had been set up to function and had never been asked to feel. "Where do I sleep?" she said. He showed her the second room. She went in without ceremony, put her bag on the chair, and turned to face him in the doorway. The man in the restaurant, she said. The waiter. He's going to be okay. It wasn't a question either. My men got him to the hospital, Jiwon said. He's in surgery. He'll make it. Something eased in her face, small, real. Good. She reached for the door. Zaraya. She stopped, looked at him. You should know, he said, that the footage from that restaurant, the cameras, the lobby, it's already circulating. By morning, the people who sent those men tonight will know your name, your workplace, your address. She held his gaze and didn't look away. Then it's a good thing I'm not at any of those places, she said. She closed the door. Jiwon stood in the hallway of his penthouse for a moment, alone with the city lights coming through the glass and the faint sound of Tokyo moving 38 floors below him. He pressed his hand against the wall, felt the solidity of it. He thought about the way she had moved toward the bleeding man when everyone else ran, the way she had swung that water pitcher without flinching, the way she had looked at him across the table in the restaurant before everything broke apart, with that specific exhausted honesty that had no calculation in it whatsoever. He went to his office, sat down, opened his laptop. The message from his security coordinator was already there, time-stamped 18 minutes ago. The 3 attackers had been identified, soldiers from the Choi Syndicate, Busan-based, which confirmed what Jiwon had already suspected. But the second item in the report was the one that sat cold in his stomach. The reservation at Keisho had been made under a rotating alias, one that changed every 2 weeks on a security cycle, one that should have been unknown outside the 5 people in Jiwon's innermost operation. Someone had given the Choi Syndicate his alias, someone who had been in the room. He stared at that for a long time. Then he opened a second window and began pulling the security footage from the penthouse building exterior, from the 3 blocks surrounding it, cross-referencing it with faces his system could identify, looking for the shadow that was already, somewhere in the city, moving toward them. He worked through the night. Down the hall, behind the closed door, Zaraya Bennett lay on her back in the dark, with her eyes open and her mind working and the dried blood still faint in the lines of her knuckles, and thought about the fact that 24 hours ago, her biggest problem had been a double shift and a broken elevator in her apartment building. She thought about the waiter's face, the color of paper, the blood spreading fast between his fingers. She thought about Jiwon in the restaurant, in the wreckage, looking at her with an expression she hadn't been able to name until now. He had looked at her like she was something he hadn't expected to find. She closed her eyes. Outside, Tokyo ran its lights across the dark and held all its secrets underneath them. And somewhere in that city, people were already looking for her face. Jiwon did not sleep. He sat at his desk until the city outside began its slow transformation from night to morning, the particular gray that arrived before the sun did, pressing against the glass like something patient, and worked through every piece of surveillance footage his system had pulled from the 3 blocks surrounding the building. He cross-referenced faces. He ran the alias leak backward through the chain of people who had known it. He drank 2 cups of coffee that he didn't taste, and felt the familiar weight of a problem that didn't have clean edges settling into his chest like a stone. 5 people had known the alias used at Keisho, Tae-sung, his operations coordinator, a man named Baek, who had been with him for 7 years, his personal assistant, Lena, half Korean, half Japanese, 29, meticulous, his uncle, who had arranged the evening and who Jiwon would sooner suspect himself than. And one other name that sat at the bottom of his mental list like something he kept turning away from. He turned away from it again and kept working. At 6:15, Tae-sung knocked twice on the office door and came in without waiting. That was their arrangement. 2 knocks, then enter. It had been their arrangement for 9 years. Tae-sung set a fresh cup of coffee on the desk without being asked, pulled the chair from the corner, and sat down with the blunt economy of a man who didn't waste motion. "Beck's clean," he said. "I went through his communications going back 6 weeks. Nothing. Lena? Still running, but her pattern's clean. No unusual contacts, no financial anomalies." Tae-sung's jaw was tight. Jiwon, say it. The alias cycle. 3 people said it. You, me, Baek. He held Jiwon's gaze. "I'm telling you it wasn't Baek. I know." The silence between them was the kind that had weight. 9 years of it. 9 years of Jiwon trusting this man with his location, his schedule, his life on 3 separate occasions. He watched Tae-sung's face, that concrete jaw, those eyes that were always moving. and looked for the thing he didn't want to find and didn't find it. "It wasn't you," Ji-won said. "No." "Then we have a fourth person who shouldn't have known." Tae-sung was quiet for a moment. "Or we have a technical breach. Someone pulled the alias from a communication channel rather than a person. Run that scenario." "Already started." Tae-sung stood. At the door he stopped. "The woman." Ji-won looked at him. "She needs to know more than you've told her," Tae-sung said. "About the scope of this. About what the Choi Syndicate will do if they decide she's useful leverage." He said it without inflection, without cruelty. Just the flat delivery of a man whose job was to think about the worst version of every situation. "She's not a soldier. She doesn't know what she's in the middle of." "I know what she is." "Do you?" Tae-sung looked at him for a second longer than necessary. Then he left. Ji-won sat with that for a while. At 7:30 he heard her moving in the kitchen. He found her standing at the counter with a glass of water, still in the scrubs from the night before, her hair down now and loose around her shoulders. She looked like someone who had slept for 3 hours and decided that was going to have to be enough. The cut on her forearm had a small amount of dried blood at the edge of the bandage. She'd clearly redressed herself at some point in the night. She looked at him when he came in, said nothing. He went to the cabinet, found the coffee, began making it. The kitchen was quiet. Outside the window, the gray morning was turning slowly gold. "How's the arm?" he said. "Fine." She drank her water. "Did you sleep?" "No." "You should." "Later." He turned to look at her. "We need to talk about what comes next." "I figured." She set the glass down, folded her arms. Not defensively, more like she was holding herself together by choice rather than necessity. "Tell me." He told her. Not everything. Not the internal leak, not the specific architecture of what he suspected, but enough. The Choi Syndicate's history of using civilian leverage, the specific methodology they had employed in Busan 2 years ago, when a rival's wife had been taken and held not for ransom, but for psychological destruction. The fact that Zoraya's face, now circulating through Choi's network, would be understood not as a random woman, but as a connection point to Ji-won. Something to be used. She listened without interrupting. That was something he was already learning about her. She didn't fill silence with noise. She let information arrive and she processed it, and then she spoke. "So they'll come for me," she said. "Possibly. Probably. To get to you." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment, then, "And staying here makes me safe." "Safer, but not safe." She looked at him. "Because someone inside your organization told them where you were last night, which means someone inside your organization knows where I am right now." He held her gaze. "I'm working on that." "That's not reassuring." "No." She unfolded her arms and pressed both palms flat on the counter, breathed. He could see her working through it, the specific discipline of someone who dealt with bad news professionally and had learned to let it land without knocking her over. "My colleague," she said, "at the hospital. Her name is Dr. Yoon. She's the one who arranged the dinner, I know." "Is she in danger?" He hadn't thought about Dr. Yoon. He thought about her now. If they're pulling the thread carefully, they'll find the connection. But she's peripheral, not useful leverage. He paused. "I can have someone watch her building." Zoraya looked at him for a second, then she nodded. That single decisive nod again. "Okay." The coffee finished. He poured 2 cups. She took hers and they stood in the kitchen in a silence that was not comfortable but was somehow not hostile either. Just 2 people in the same problem, drinking coffee. "You should eat something," he said. "You should sleep," she said back. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she opened the refrigerator and looked at what was in it, with the assessing expression of someone who cooked out of practical necessity rather than pleasure. "I can make eggs," she said. "If you have eggs." "I think there are eggs." "You think." "I don't cook." She looked at him over the refrigerator door. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile, too tired for that, but something in that direction. The faintest softening at the edge of an expression that had been working very hard all night. She made eggs. He watched her move through the unfamiliar kitchen with the same focused competence she'd brought to everything else, finding what she needed without asking, adapting to what wasn't there. She made enough for 2 without making a point of it, put a plate in front of him without ceremony. He ate. He couldn't remember the last time someone had cooked for him in his own kitchen. The thought arrived and he set it down and didn't look at it. They were halfway through the meal when his phone went. He looked at the screen, Bayek, and held up one finger. She nodded and kept eating. He took the call in the hallway. Bayek's voice was tight. We pulled the channel logs from last week's alias rotation. Someone accessed the confirmation file from an external terminal at 11:42 p.m., 3 days ago. The IP routes through a proxy, but the access pattern matches an internal credential. Jiwan's hand tightened on the phone. Whose credential? A pause. That's where it gets complicated. The credential belongs to Lena's terminal, but Lena logged off at 8 p.m. that night. We have the building exit on camera. So someone used her credential after she left. Someone who had her log in, or someone who had physical access to her terminal. Another pause. Or Lena gave someone her login. Jiwan said nothing. There's one more thing, Beck said. The proxy IP. We can't fully unmask it, but we can trace its geographic origin. It bounced through 3 servers, but the origin point is Tokyo. A pause. Not Busan. Not somewhere in Choi's infrastructure. Tokyo. Jiwan stood in the hallway of his penthouse and let that land. Choi's people in Tokyo. Not a remote operation, someone on the ground. Someone who had been here long enough to set up a proxy chain, to identify an internal credential, to know the alias rotation schedule. Someone embedded. Lock Lena's credentials, he said. Don't tell her yet. I want to talk to her myself. He paused. And Beck, this doesn't leave you and me until I say. Understood. He ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment. Behind him, through the kitchen door, he could hear the quiet sound of Zariah moving. A cup being set down, a chair shifting. Normal sounds, the sounds of someone simply existing in a space. He went back in. She looked at his face and said, Bad news. Complex news. Which is worse. He sat down, looked at her, made a decision. The kind that came from something other than calculation, which made him distrust it slightly, but which he made anyway. Someone in my organization has been feeding information to Choi's people. They used an internal credential to access my alias rotation 3 days before the restaurant. She was quiet, absorbing this. So it's not just a leak, it's someone placed. Possibly. Someone who's been here a while. Yes, she looked at her coffee cup, then at him. You told me this because you want me to understand the situation isn't contained. I told you this because you asked for honesty last night, and I said you had my word. She looked at him for a moment, then she picked up her cup. What do we do today? He appreciated that. The we. Not because it was a claim she was making. He didn't think she meant it that way. But because it was a practical acknowledgement that they were in this together regardless of how either of them felt about it. You stay here. I have meetings. I'll do them remotely. My team will continue running down the breach. He paused. I can get you a change of clothes sent up, and I'll find out about your colleague. She nodded, then quietly, my patients. I know. There's a woman on my ward, Mrs. Tanaka. She's been there 12 days, and she's scared, and she responds to me because I'm consistent with her. She said it without emotion, just information. If I'm just gone, I'll have the hospital told that you've been called away on a family emergency. I'll make sure your supervisor communicates directly with Mrs. Tanaka's care team. He held her gaze. I will make it specific. I'm not brushing this off. She looked at him. Something moved in her face, something evaluating, something that had been doing a running assessment of him since last night and was updating itself based on new information. Okay, she said. The morning moved. He worked from his office. She, from what he could observe through the open door across the hallway, found his bookshelves and pulled something down and read. Curled in the corner of the couch, occasionally getting up to walk to the window and look at the city. She did not ask him for things. She did not come to the office door. She occupied the space with a self-sufficiency that he found unexpectedly easy to be around. At 11, Tae-sung arrived in person. Jiwan met him in the entry. Tae-sung's face was controlled in the specific way that meant what he had to say was not controlled at all. Walk me through it, Jiwan said. Choi's people made contact with one of our street-level distributors in Shinjuku this morning. Not violent, informational. Taesung's eyes were flat. They know she's here, Jiwon. Not the floor, not the unit, but they know she's in this building. Jiwon said nothing. We have a leak in the building staff. Has to be. Someone who saw her come in last night. Taesung's jaw tightened. I'm vetting the night shift roster now, but that's not the immediate problem. What's the immediate problem? Choi's coordinator in Tokyo reached out to our Shinjuku distributor with a message. He was very specific that the message should reach you today. Taesung pulled out his phone, read from the screen in a flat voice. Tell Kang Ji-won we have no quarrel with the woman. She can walk away clean. All he has to do is step back from the Incheon port negotiation and let the Busan contract go. The woman goes home. The war stays a war, and nothing personal. Ji-won was quiet for a long time. They're offering to leave her alone, Taesung said, in exchange for Incheon. I heard. That's $2 billion in transit fees over 5 years. I know what it is. Taesung was quiet. Outside the entry window, Tokyo was going about its Tuesday with complete indifference. What do you want to do? Taesung said. Ji-won looked at him. What I want to do is find the person in this building who told them she was here and have a very specific conversation. And the offer. Ignore it. Taesung's expression didn't change. They won't let it stay an offer. I know. Ji-won turned back toward the hallway. Stopped. Don't tell her about the message yet, he said. Taesung was quiet for a beat, then, that's not the call I'd make. I know. Ji-won didn't turn around. Run the building staff roster. Find me the breach. He went back to his office, sat down, stared at the screen without seeing it for a moment. He had been in negotiations over the Incheon port access for 11 months. It was the most strategically significant expansion in 5 years. Not just the money, though the money was significant, but the positioning. Incheon gave him leverage over 3 shipping lanes and made the Choi Syndicate's Busan operation strategically redundant. It was the move that ended the war before it fully started, not through violence, but through economic irrelevance. And Choi was willing to let a woman he'd met 14 hours ago walk out of it in exchange for that. Which meant Choi was more afraid of Incheon than he'd let on. Which meant Ji-won was closer to winning than he'd known. He sat with that and felt the geometry of it settle, and then felt something else beneath it that was less clean and less comfortable. The specific discomfort of a man who has made a decision and knows it and is waiting for the moment to tell the truth of it to someone who deserves the truth. At 2 p.m., she appeared in his office doorway. He looked up. Someone's outside, she said. Her voice was level, but her eyes were different, alert, the way they'd been in the restaurant. In the parking structure across the street, 4th level, 2nd pillar from the left. I've been watching them for 20 minutes. They haven't moved. Ji-won was on his feet before she finished the sentence. He looked through the office window at the angle she'd described. It took him 4 seconds to find it. A figure, partially obscured by the pillar, positioned with clear sight lines to the building entrance. He reached for his phone, called Taesung. Parking structure, 4th level, pillar 2 from the left entrance. I need eyes on them in the next 3 minutes. He ended the call, turned to look at Zoraya. She was standing in the doorway with her arms folded and her jaw tight, and her eyes on the parking structure. She had the book in her left hand, a finger still marking her page, like she'd gotten up from reading and followed an instinct, and the instinct had turned out to be correct. How long have you been watching? He said. Since noon. I couldn't focus. She didn't look at him. There was something about the way they were standing, too still. Everyone else in that structure was moving, getting in cars, walking. That one just stood. Ji-won looked at her. You have surveillance training? I have survival instincts. She looked at him then. I grew up in a neighborhood where you learned to notice who was standing still. He held her gaze for a moment. His phone buzzed. Taesung, confirmed. 1 male, camera equipment, telephoto lens, photographing the building entrance. We're moving to intercept. Ji-won read it and felt the cold that came with confirmation. Not a random figure, a photographer, documenting who entered and exited, confirming her presence, building a file. He put the phone down and looked at Zoraya. She read his face. They're watching the building. Documenting, he said. Building confirmation of your location. She was quiet for a moment. Then she stepped fully into the office, let the door fall half-closed behind her, and looked at him with the specific look of someone who has been patient and is now done being patient. Ji-won. Yes. What aren't you telling me? He looked at her for a long time. The city was bright and cold outside the window, and the parking structure sat across the street like a problem that had already been there for hours before anyone named it. Choi's people sent a message this morning, he said. They offered to leave you alone, in exchange for me stepping back from a port negotiation. She was still. They know you're in this building, he said. Not the unit, but the building. The silence stretched. You were going to tell me this when, she said. I was processing how much to... No? Her voice was sharp, not loud, sharp. Precisely controlled anger. Don't manage me. I'm not one of your soldiers. I'm not an asset. I'm a person who is in this situation because I was in the wrong restaurant at the wrong time, and you told me last night that I had your honesty. She held his gaze without flinching. Was that true, or was that useful? The question landed the way she'd meant it to. It was true, he said. Then tell me all of it. He told her all of it. The Incheon negotiation. The $2 billion. What it meant strategically. The fact that Choi's willingness to trade her for it meant Ji-won was closer to winning than anyone had realized. The internal breach, Lena's credentials, the embedded operative, the building staff leak that Tae-sung was running down right now. She listened, stood perfectly still in the middle of his office and listened to the full architecture of the situation she had walked into 28 minutes late and let it settle around her without moving. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. So I'm leverage, she said. You were leverage the moment they identified you. I didn't make you leverage. No. She said it slowly, thinking it through. But you knew this morning that they'd offered to trade me, and you didn't tell me. Which means for the last 4 hours I've been in this apartment thinking the situation was one thing when it was another. Yes, that can't happen again. Agreed. She turned away from him and went to the window, looked out at the city. Her reflection in the glass was very still. If you give them what they want, she said, if you step back from Incheon, I go home. That's what they're offering. But you're not going to take it. He said nothing. She looked at his reflection in the glass. Because Incheon is worth more than my safety. Because Incheon is the move that ends this, he said. If I give it up, Choi doesn't stop. He takes it as weakness. The war continues, and the next leverage he uses against me won't be someone he found in a restaurant. It'll be someone I actually... He stopped. She turned to look at him. He had stopped mid-sentence, and he held her gaze and didn't finish it. And she was smart enough to understand exactly what the unfinished sentence contained. The room was very quiet. Someone you actually what? She said quietly. He looked at her, looked at the city, looked at his own hands on the desk. I should have walked out of that restaurant at 8:20, he said, before you arrived. I should have left. But you didn't. No. Why? He was quiet for a long time. Then, with the particular difficulty of a man who had not said anything honest about himself in a very long time. I don't know. I was about to. And then you came through the door and you looked like the most exhausted, honest person I had ever seen, and I asked you to sit down. She looked at him for a moment. Then she turned back to the window. Don't give them Incheon, she said quietly. He looked at her back. Whatever it costs, she said. Don't give them Incheon. She paused. But don't lie to me again about what it's costing. He was about to answer when his phone went. Tae-sung. He answered. The voice on the other end was not Tae-sung. It was a voice he recognized. Low, unhurried, with the specific cadence of a man who had never once in his life doubted that he was the most dangerous person in any room. Kang Ji-won, said Choi Ryujin. I'm calling as a courtesy. The offer expires at midnight tonight. Ji-won said nothing. After midnight, Choi said, she stops being leverage and starts being a message. A pause. And after that, the next message will be about Park Tae-sung. The line went dead. Ji-won lowered the phone and looked at the screen. His second call had come in while Choi was speaking, a notification he hadn't seen in real time. From the number assigned to Tae-sung's personal phone, the message was 4 words. They took me. Run. Jiwan stared at those 4 words and felt the floor of everything he'd built shift underneath him. And the cold that moved through his body was not fear exactly, but something older and more absolute. The specific sensation of a man who has spent 15 years building walls and has just discovered that one of them was never a wall at all. He looked up at Zoraya. She was watching his face. "What happened?" she said. He showed her the phone. She read it, looked up at him. Neither of them spoke. Outside, Tokyo moved through its afternoon with complete indifference, and somewhere in that city, the man who had stood beside Jiwon for 9 years was on his knees in a room Jiwon couldn't see yet. And the war that had been a war had just... The 4 words on the screen were still there when Jiwon looked up. "They took me. Run." He looked at them the way you look at a wound before the pain arrives. With full comprehension and no feeling yet, the brain processing the information and the body waiting to catch up. Tae-sung had been in this building 2 hours ago. He had walked out to run the parking structure surveillance, to vet the night staff roster, to do the work the way he always did it. Methodical, invisible, permanent. And somewhere between then and now, 9 years of absolute reliability had sent 4 words and gone silent. Jiwon called the number back. It rang 7 times. No answer. He called Kwon, the younger man, the one who had held pressure on the wounded waiter last night. Kwon picked up on the second ring, and his voice was already wrong, already tight, with the specific quality of someone managing controlled panic. "Where is he?" Jiwon said. We split up to cover the structure and the building perimeter. I lost visual on him 40 minutes ago. I thought he was running the staff interviews. I thought Kwon stopped. Breath. "I can't reach him. His earpiece is offline. Location on his phone. I'm looking. It's..." A pause that lasted too long. "It's showing the building, 3rd floor, but he's not..." "Get to the 3rd floor, now. Don't go alone." He ended the call. Zoraya was watching him from across the office, with her arms at her sides and her face very still. She had read the message. She understood the shape of what had happened even without the full picture. "Tae-sung," she said. "Yes." "They took him from inside the building." Jiwon looked at her. Yes. She absorbed that. The building that was supposed to be safe. The perimeter that was supposed to be controlled. The staff that Tae-sung himself had been in the process of vetting when he disappeared. "The breach in the building staff," she said quietly. "It wasn't just someone passing information. They had someone inside who could move." "Yes." She looked at the phone in his hand. "What do you need to do?" He was already moving. He went to the safe behind the bookshelf. She watched him open it without trying to look away, without performing discomfort. And he took out the 2 weapons inside, checked them both with the fast practice movements of someone who had done this thousands of times, and put one in the holster inside his jacket and the other in the back of his waistband. He turned to her. "You stay in this unit," he said. "Door locked. Do not open it for anyone except me or Kwon. Kwon you've seen. The man who helped you last night." "The young one." "Yes." She nodded. "If I'm not back in 2 hours..." He stopped, looked at her. "There's a phone in the kitchen drawer, preloaded, untraceable. The only number in it is a contact named Watanabe. Call it, say the word Akasaka, and someone will come to get you out." She looked at the safe, back at him. "You're going down there alone." "I have men in the building." "You have men who didn't notice someone was taken from inside the building." He said nothing. "Jiwon." Her voice was level, not pleading, not emotional, just direct. "Don't walk into your own building thinking it's clear when it isn't. I know my building. You thought you knew your building 40 minutes ago." He looked at her for a moment. The specific frustration of a man being told something true by someone he didn't want to be told it by. Then he took the phone from his desk and called Bayek. "I need a floor-by-floor confirmation of every person in this building who isn't a resident, right now. And I need the building's internal camera feed on my phone in the next 3 minutes." He got the camera feed in too. He went through it standing in the hallway while Zoraya stood in the office doorway and watched. 3rd floor showed nothing. An empty corridor, a service room door slightly ajar that should have been closed. Taesung's last known position, according to Kwan's report, had been near the service elevator on 3. Ji-won stared at the service room door. He went. She locked the door behind him. He heard the deadbolt turn and felt something in him settle slightly. One variable controlled, one thing he didn't have to divide his attention over. And then he moved down the stairwell with his hand near the weapon and his mind running the building's architecture from memory, mapping every corner before he turned it. The 3rd floor was quiet. Too quiet, in the specific way of a space where something has happened and the evidence has been partially managed. The corridor lights were on. The carpet was undisturbed. But the service room door was still ajar and there was a smell in the hallway. Faint, chemical. The specific smell of the cleaning solution the building staff used, wrong in its intensity for a time of day when the service rooms were supposed to be closed. He pushed the door open with his foot. The service room was empty. Cleaning supplies on shelves, a utility sink, a folded cart. On the floor near the cart, a phone. Face down. He crouched and turned it over. Taesung's. The screen was cracked, like it had been knocked from a height. Like someone had moved fast and it had fallen and they hadn't stopped to pick it up. The message to Ji-won was still visible on the cracked screen. They took me. Run. Sent in the last seconds before whatever happened, Ji-won stood up. His phone buzzed. Baek. The service elevator on 3 went to the basement between 147 and 152 this afternoon, Beck said. Basement level has a loading dock. Loading dock has an external vehicle access point that our exterior cameras don't cover. It's in the maintenance documentation as a dead zone. A dead zone in his own building. Something that had been mapped, documented, and never corrected because no one had imagined needing it corrected. Vehicle. Basement parking camera shows a white cargo van entering at 1:39 before Taesung's disappearance. It exited at 1:54. Beck paused. The plates are fake. We're running the van's make and model against traffic camera footage in a 3-block radius. Ji-won was already walking back toward the stairwell. The staff member who had basement access in that window. One name. A building maintenance worker, contracted through an external firm. Name on file is Cho Dae-hyun. He's been in the building for 11 days. 11 days. The Incheon negotiation had escalated 11 days ago. Ji-won stopped walking. Pull everything on Cho Dae-hyun, he said. Every piece of documentation from the contracting firm, every access log, every camera appearance in this building going back to day 1. He paused. And Baek, the contracting firm. Already running it. When you find the connection to Choi's operation, and you will find it, document it clean. I want it airtight. Understood. He went back upstairs. Unlocked the door. Came in. Zariah was standing in the middle of the living room. She had changed. She must have found something in the spare room, a dark sweatshirt and clean pants, still slightly too large for her, but clean. And she was holding a cup of coffee with both hands and watching his face the moment he came through the door. You found something, she said. They brought someone in 11 days ago, a maintenance worker. He had basement access. Ji-won put the phone down on the table. They took Taesung through the loading dock in a van. She set the coffee down. Where would they take him? Somewhere they control. Somewhere in the city. He sat down. Pressed his hands flat on the table. Choi has properties in Tokyo, legitimate fronts, warehouses, a seafood distribution operation out of Tsukiji. My people are running locations. How long before you find him? He looked at her. I don't know. She sat down across from him. The midnight deadline. Yes. That's 9 hours. Yes. She was quiet for a moment. They took him to make the deadline real, to show you they can take things from you. She paused. And if you don't give them Incheon by midnight, what happens to him? Ji-won said nothing. She read his silence. They'll kill him. Or worse, use him to keep the pressure on indefinitely. He looked at his hands. Taesung knows too much about my operation to be left alive long-term, regardless of what I do. Choi knows that. Taesung knows that. The weight of that sat between them. He knew that when he sent the message, she said quietly. Ji-won looked at her. They took me. Run. She said it slowly. He wasn't asking you to save him. He was telling you to get me out before they used him to find where I was. She paused. He was protecting me. Jiwon said nothing. He looked at the table. He doesn't know me, she said. No. But he did that anyway. Jiwon was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had changed. Flatter, harder. The voice of someone pressing weight down on something that would crack if he didn't. Taesung has been with me since I was 22, before I was anything. He was the first person who worked for me because he chose to, not because he owed me something. He stopped. I'm not leaving him there. I know, she said. Kwon arrived 20 minutes later with Baek on the phone and new information that rearranged everything. The contracting firm that had placed Cho Dae-hyun in the building was a shell company. 3 layers of corporate obfuscation, but at the bottom of it, the ownership traced to a Tokyo-registered LLC that appeared in no criminal database, which was itself suspicious, but which shared a registered address with a logistics company that Jiwon's people had been watching for 6 months as a suspected Choi front. Clean, careful, patient. Whoever had planned this had been in Tokyo for months, building the infrastructure, placing the pieces. Not a reactive operation, a designed one. Choi had decided to move on Incheon long before the restaurant, long before last night, and had spent months constructing the conditions for exactly this moment. Jiwon sat with that and felt the shape of how badly he'd been outmaneuvered shift into full visibility. There's more, Kwon said. He was standing near the window, his face uncomfortable in a specific way that meant the more was not going to be manageable. Say it. Kwon looked at his phone. The traffic camera footage from the van. We got a partial on a route. It went through Shinjuku and then south toward Shinagawa. Beck is running the Choi properties in that area. He paused. But while we were pulling that footage, Beck found something else. Something in the camera data from the last 72 hours. He turned his phone around. It was a still image, timestamped 31 hours ago, the morning before the restaurant. A street camera near Kesho, the restaurant. 2 figures standing near a car. One of them was partially obscured. The other was Lena. Jiwon looked at the image for a long time. Lena, 29 years old, 7 years in his operation, the one whose credentials had been used to pull the alias, the one whose terminal had been accessed at 11:42 p.m., the one he had told Baek not to confront yet, the one he had been turning away from in his mental list since this morning. He had turned away from it because some part of him had not wanted to find it. He was looking at it now. The figure she's talking to, he said. We can't get a full face, but the build and the clothing, Kwon stopped, started again. It matches Cho Dae-hyun, the maintenance worker, the man who had been placed in the building 11 days ago. Lena meeting with him 31 hours before the restaurant attack, before the alias was leaked, before any of it. She's not peripheral, Jiwon said. His voice was very quiet. No, Kwon said. She's the source. She was the source from the beginning. The room was very quiet. Zarya was sitting completely still on the couch. She was not looking at the phone. She was looking at Jiwon's face, watching the thing that moved through it. Not rage, which was what she might have expected. Something colder. The specific expression of a man who has discovered that the architecture of his world has a different shape than he built it to have, and is now recalculating everything. Where is she now? Jiwon said. The office, Kwon said. She came in this morning like normal. She doesn't know where... Don't touch her. Jiwon stood. Don't move on her. Don't tip her. Don't change anything about her day. I want her to feel safe until I'm in the room with her. Kwon nodded. And get me a location on Taesung. I need Shinagawa properties narrowed down in the next 2 hours. Kwon left. Jiwon stood at the window. Tokyo moved below him with complete indifference. He thought about Lena. 7 years. The operational precision of her, the attention to detail, the way she had always seemed to anticipate what he needed before he asked. He had trusted that as competence, as loyalty. He had trusted it the way you trust a foundation, without examining it, because you have built so much on top of it that examining it has become too costly to consider. He thought about the alias, the restaurant, the 3 men coming through the window. He thought about the waiter bleeding on the floor. He thought about Zarya walking toward the bleeding man when everyone else ran, and he understood now with complete clarity that the cost of that act, the cost of her simply being in that room, was something that had been engineered. Someone had known he would be there. Someone had known the date, the alias, the restaurant, the time. Lena had known all of those things. Lena had handed all of those things to the people who had sent men with blades through the window of a restaurant full of civilians. He pressed his hand against the glass. The cold of it came through his palm. G1. He turned. Zarya was standing behind him. She had her arms at her sides and her face was carrying something that was not pity. He would have rejected pity, but something else. The specific expression of someone who has sat with bad things long enough to know what they look like and is not flinching from the shape of this one. You knew it was her before the photo, she said. You'd been turning it over since this morning. He looked at her. Yes. Why didn't you move on her earlier? He was quiet. Because you didn't want it to be true. He said nothing, which was its own answer. She nodded slowly. She didn't make it into a lesson. She didn't press it. She just stood there with the full knowledge of it and let it be what it was. She's still in the office, Zarya said, which means she doesn't know you know, which means you have one chance to get information from her before she disappears. She paused. Where is Tae-sung most likely being held? He turned to face her. Why? Because you're going to need to move tonight, and you're going to need a plan, and I want to understand the geography. She held his gaze. I'm not asking to be involved. I'm asking because I've been sitting in this apartment for 12 hours with incomplete information, and that ends now. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went to the desk and pulled up the map. He walked her through it. The Shinagawa waterfront. 3 Choi-connected properties in that corridor. A cold storage facility, an import warehouse, and a fish market operation that had been running legitimate business for 4 years and which was, according to a source G1 had inside Choi's Tokyo logistics chain, also used for private meetings that didn't appear in any record. The fish market, Zarya said. He looked at her. The cold storage and the warehouse. If they're taking someone for leverage, they need the person alive and manageable and accessible to communications. Cold storage is too visible for that kind of operation. Too many workers, too regulated. She traced the map with one finger without touching the screen. The fish market closes at noon. After that, it's controlled access, private. You can move people in and out of a loading dock without anyone seeing. Jiwon looked at the map. He looked at her. You worked all that out in 30 seconds, he said. I worked all that out in the last hour while you were dealing with Kwan. She looked up. I told you, running toward the problem is the job. He held her gaze and felt something move through him that was not the time for, not now, maybe not ever, but which was present and real, and which he noted and set aside with the discipline of someone who has spent 15 years managing what he allowed himself to feel when he needed to function. The fish market, he said. The fish market, she said. His phone went. Beck. The Lena confirmation is complete, Beck said. Communications going back 4 months. She's been passing operational data, alias rotations, meeting schedules, property access codes. All of it. A pause. G1. The restaurant wasn't the first attempt. 6 weeks ago, the route change on the Shibuya run, the one where we hit that traffic delay and arrived 40 minutes late. I remember. That delay was engineered. Lena submitted false road closure data to the logistics system. The original route would have taken you through an intersection that Beck stopped. There were men waiting at that intersection, G1. We pulled the camera data. They stood down when you didn't arrive. 6 weeks ago. He had been standing in his car 6 weeks ago, mildly irritated by a traffic delay, thinking about the meeting ahead of him, completely unaware that the intersection 2 blocks back had men in it waiting for him to appear. Lena had been doing this for 4 months. Where is she right now? He said. Still in the office. She just sent 3 routine communications. She's performing normal. Beck's voice was flat. She doesn't know. Keep her performing normal. He ended the call. He sat down, put the phone on the table, put both hands flat on the surface, and breathed. 4 months. Lena had been working against him for 4 months. The alias leak had been the visible edge of something that went all the way down. Every operational decision in that window, every route, every schedule, every meeting location potentially compromised. He had been building strategy on a foundation that was actively being undermined, and he hadn't seen it because he hadn't wanted to see it, Because the people closest to you are always the ones you give the longest grace. He understood now exactly how Taesung had been taken so cleanly. Lena would have known his patrol pattern. She would have known the building schedule, the staff rotation, the basement dead zone. She had given Cho Dae-hyun everything he needed to move through the building and extract Taesung without triggering a single alarm. She had handed Taesung to them. Ji-won sat with that and let it be what it was. Zaraya sat down across from him. She didn't speak. She just sat there in the clean, direct way she had, present, not crowding, not performing comfort, and let him be in it. After a long moment, he looked up. "Midnight," he said. "8 hours," she said. "I need Lena's information about where exactly they're holding him. She'll know. And I need the fish market confirmed as the location before I move. And if she won't talk, she'll talk." Something in his voice was different. Not loud, quieter, actually, but with a quality underneath the quiet that she had not heard from him before. Something stripped of the careful control, something that had gone past anger into a register that was colder and more absolute and more dangerous. She looked at him, and for the first time since the restaurant, she felt the full reality of what he was. Not just the power of him, which was visible and had been visible from the moment she saw him, but the capacity of him. The specific thing he had built himself into over 15 years. She did not flinch from it. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. A brief, complicated thing. "Nothing," he said. "Stay here. Stay safe." "Ji-won." "No." His voice was firm. "What I'm going to do next, you don't need to see that." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded. He stood, picked up his jacket. At the door, he stopped. "The fish market," he said. "Your read on it." "I'm right," she said. "It's the fish market." He looked at her one moment longer. Then he went to find Lena. The building that housed his Tokyo operations office was 4 blocks away, connected to the penthouse by a route his security team swept twice daily. He moved through it with Kwon 2 steps behind him and his mind running clean and cold and completely stripped of everything except the next necessary thing. Lena was at her desk when he came through the office door. She looked up, smiled. The professional smile. The one he had seen 10,000 times. The one that had been, for 4 months, a performance over a betrayal. He closed the door. He sat down across from her. He put his phone on the desk between them with the photograph on the screen. Lena and Cho Dae-hyun, 31 hours ago, in the shadow of a street camera that they had not thought to check. He watched her face. The smile lasted 2 more seconds. Then it didn't. In the silence that followed, the full weight of 4 months settled into the room like something that had always been there. And the woman he had trusted with the architecture of his life looked at the photograph and looked at him and understood that the grace had run out. "Where is he?" Ji-won said. Lena said nothing. "Where is Taesung?" Still nothing, but her hands, flat on the desk, had gone white at the knuckles. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Ji-won said, and his voice was the quietest it had been all day, and that was the most frightening thing in the room. And then the way this conversation goes is entirely up to Lena talked. It took 11 minutes. Ji-won did not raise his voice once. He did not touch her. He sat across the desk with his hands flat on the surface and his eyes on her face, and he asked the same question in the same quiet voice until the silence between the asking and the not answering became more unbearable than the answering. She broke at minute 11. The fish market. Zaraya had been right. Tsukiji waterfront, a private warehouse annex behind the main distribution building, accessed through a loading dock on the south side that the Choi operation had been using for 8 months. Taesung was being held in a cold room on the ground floor. Not a freezer, just a room kept at 10 degrees, damp, dark. The kind of room that didn't kill you fast but wore you down to something manageable. Choi Ryujin would be there personally. That was the piece Ji-won hadn't anticipated. Choi had flown into Tokyo 48 hours ago, which meant this was not a proxy operation run through lieutenants. Choi had come himself, which meant Incheon mattered to him at a level that went beyond strategy. It was personal. Lena gave him the guard count. 8 men confirmed, possibly 2 more in rotation. Entry points, patrol intervals, communication channels. She gave it all in a flat voice with her hands still white-knuckled on the desk. looking at a point somewhere past Ji-won's left shoulder, performing the specific detachment of someone who has already made peace with the consequences and is now just trying to get to the other side of the moment. When she was done, Ji-won sat for 3 more seconds. Then he stood, looked at Kwon. Kwon crossed the room, and Lena did not resist, and that was the end of that. Ji-won walked back through the building, down the 4 blocks, up to the penthouse. He moved fast. His mind was already at the fish market, already running the geometry of it. Entry, positions, Taesung's location, Choi's position, the 8 guards, the 2 unknowns, the loading dock, the south approach. He was through the penthouse door before he registered that something was different. Zaraya was not on this couch. She was standing at the kitchen counter with his city map spread open in front of her and a pen in her hand, and she had been marking something. She looked up when he came in. Her eyes went to his face and read it in the fast, clinical way she had. "Fish market," she said. "Yes." "How many men?" He stopped. "I told you to stay here." "I stayed here. I've been here." She turned the map around. She had marked the Tsukiji waterfront, the main structure, the annex, 2 approach routes from the north and the west. She had marked what she could work out from the map's detail with a precision that was not guesswork. The south loading dock approach is exposed for 30 meters, but the north side has a covered pedestrian walkway that runs parallel to the annex wall. If you come from the north, you're covered until you're 15 meters from the entrance. Ji-won looked at the map. He looked at her. "I looked it up on the building permit database," she said. "It's public record." She held his gaze. "I've been here for 6 hours doing nothing while Taesung is in a cold room somewhere. You told me this situation. You showed me the map. Did you think I was going to sit on the couch?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he looked back at the map. "The north approach is better," he said, "but the walkway has light exposure on the east end. It needs 2 men to clear it before the main group moves." "Okay. You're not coming." "I know." He looked up. "I'm not a soldier," she said. "I know I'm not coming." She paused. "But I'm a trauma nurse, and wherever you're going tonight, people are going to get hurt, and you should take me as far as you safely can and leave me in a position to do what I do." He looked at her for a long moment. The clock on the wall read 4:17 p.m. 7 hours and 43 minutes to midnight. "Get your kit," he said. They moved at 9 p.m. 6 men. Kwon, 4 others from Ji-won's Tokyo team, who had been verified clean in the last 12 hours, and Ji-won himself. Zaraya in the second vehicle with a driver named Sato, who had orders that did not include the word optional. She stays in the vehicle until Ji-won calls. She goes to the secondary position. If he calls the fallback signal, she does not move under any circumstance until she hears his voice. She had her nursing bag. She had added to it from the penthouse's medical supplies, pressure bandages, hemostatic gauze, an emergency airway kit, 2 units of IV saline that she had no way to hang but carried anyway because you always carried the thing you might need. She had also, without asking, taken the preloaded phone from the kitchen drawer and put it in her jacket pocket. The one with Watanabe's number. Ji-won had seen her do it. He hadn't said anything. The city moved around them as they drove south through the evening. Tokyo at 9 p.m. was restaurants and foot traffic and salary workers heading for trains. Normal, ordinary, relentless. The kind of city that happened around you regardless of what you were in the middle of, which Ji-won had always found, in a cold way, useful. Cities didn't notice. They just continued. In the first vehicle, Kwon drove and Ji-won sat in the passenger seat and looked at the road and did not think about the things that didn't help. He thought about the fish market layout. He thought about 10 degrees in a dark room and how long a man Taesung's size could take that before it started doing real damage. He thought about 8 guards in Choi Ryu-jin somewhere inside that building, waiting for a midnight deadline that Ji-won had never intended to meet. Choi knew he wasn't going to meet it. That was the thing. Choi was not a man who believed in deadlines. He had set midnight because midnight created pressure, and pressure created mistakes. And mistakes were what Choi had been engineering for 4 months with extraordinary patience and extraordinary resources. The deadline wasn't the point. The fish market was the point. Choi wanted Ji-won to come, which meant the fish market was a trap, which meant Ji-won was walking into it. "He wants you there," Kwon said from the driver's seat, as if reading the thought. Choi could have killed Taesung hours ago. He kept him alive. Bait, Jiwan said. Yes, I know. Quan was quiet for a moment. And we're going anyway. We're going anyway. Quan drove. The city moved. Jiwan watched the lights go past. This is the part, Quan said, where a smarter man might reconsider. Probably. Just noting that. Noted. They drove in silence for a while. Taesung would reconsider, Quan said. Tactically. He'd find another way. Taesung is in a 10-degree room because someone I trusted sold his location to the people who have him. Jiwan looked at the road. There's no other way. There's just this way. Done well or done badly. Quan nodded. Kept driving. The fish market district at 9 p.m. was different from its morning self. The main Tsukiji operation closed at noon, the public market by afternoon, and what was left in the evening was the industrial periphery. Logistics, cold storage, the loading infrastructure that supported the morning rush. Quiet. Working class quiet. The quiet of machinery and concrete and the smell of salt water and diesel. They parked 3 blocks north. Jiwan ran the final confirmation with Beck by phone. Guard positions unchanged from Lena's intelligence. Choi's vehicle still in the lot. No additional arrivals in the last 2 hours. Then he put the phone away and looked at the 5 men around him in the amber dark of a loading district side street. Quan and Ren clear the north walkway first, he said. Miko and Park hold the south dock. No one moves until the walkway is clear. He paused. Taesung is in the ground floor cold room, north interior wall. Primary objective is him out of that building breathing. Everything else is secondary. He looked at each of them. Choi is mine. No one argued with that. They moved. The north walkway was exactly what Zoraya's map had shown. A covered passage running parallel to the annex wall, partially sheltered with light exposure on the east end near a security lamp. Quan and Ren cleared it in 4 minutes, moving low and fast past the lamp while it cycled on its timer rotation. Clean. Then Jiwan and the others moved through, the concrete damp under their feet and the salt smell thick around them, and the building's bulk rising on their right like something that had been waiting. The loading entrance on the north side was a steel roll door, closed, with a personnel entry beside it. One guard outside the personnel door. Young, poorly positioned, his back was partly to the walkway approach, his attention on his phone. Quan handled it in 12 seconds without sound. They went in. The interior was dim and vast and smelled of fish and cold and something chemical underneath. High ceilings, industrial lighting on low, the kind of space that made your footsteps louder than you wanted. Rows of empty processing tables. A forklift parked against the far wall. Somewhere ahead, voices. 2 of them, speaking Korean. The particular low casual tone of men on watch who didn't expect anything to happen. Jiwan counted the space, mapped it against Lena's description. Cold room, north interior wall, which put it ahead and to his left, behind a secondary door that was visible across the processing floor. 30 meters. Open floor. No cover except the processing tables. Between him and the door, 2 guards. Quan went left. Jiwan went right. They crossed the floor in the practiced silence of men who had done versions of this before, using the table rows as cover, angles coordinated without communication, moving in the rhythm of people who had worked together long enough to share instinct. The 2 guards went down within 4 seconds of each other. Jiwan reached the cold room door. Steel handle, no lock. They'd secured Taesung with confidence rather than hardware. He pulled it open. The cold hit him first. 10 degrees, Lena had said. She'd been right. Taesung was against the back wall with his hands secured behind him and his legs out in front of him and his head down. He was conscious. Jiwan could see the tension in his shoulders shift when the door opened. But he came up slow, his eyes adjusting to the light, his face carrying the specific gray look of a man who had been sitting in cold and dark for 7 hours and had spent that time deciding how this ended. When he saw Jiwan, his face did something that Jiwan looked at for 1 second and then looked away from because it was not the time. "Can you walk?" Jiwan said. "Yes." His voice was rough, dry. "Hands." Quan cut the restraints. Taesung got his arms in front of him and pressed them against his thighs, trying to bring the circulation back, his jaw tight with the effort of not making a sound about the pain of it. Ji-won crouched in front of him. Where is he? Tae-sung looked at him. Second floor. Office above the processing floor. He's been up there since they brought me in. He paused. Ji-won. He has 4 men up there with him. Personal guard. Not the perimeter rotation. I know. He's expecting you. I know. Tae-sung looked at him for a moment. His face was gray and his lips were cracked and his eyes were the same eyes they had always been. Moving, assessing, never quite still. There's something else. One of the men who came with him from Busan. I recognized him. He paused. He worked for your father. Ji-won went very still. Before. Years before. Tae-sung held his gaze. He was in your father's operation before everything fell apart. Ji-won. Choi didn't come for Incheon. Incheon is the surface. What he came for is older than that. Ji-won looked at him in the cold dim of the room and let that land. His father. A man who had been dead for 11 years, whose operation had collapsed in a cascade of betrayal and blood that Ji-won had spent his entire adult life building away from. A history he had sealed off the way you seal off a room in a house you don't want to think about. Choi Ryujin had been there, in that history. And he had waited with extraordinary patience for the right moment to finish something. Get him out, Ji-won told Kwon. He stood up. Get him to the vehicle. Get Zaraya. Ji-won thought, Tae-sung started. I heard you. His voice was very quiet. Get him out, Kwon. He crossed the processing floor alone. The stairs to the second floor were at the far end. A metal industrial staircase, open, no cover. He went up them fast and without pretending to be quiet, because the time for quiet had passed and Choi knew he was in the building, and there was a specific clarity that came with stopping the pretense and just moving. The 2 guards at the top of the stairs came at him before he reached the landing. The first one he took with a shoulder hit that used the man's own weight and the momentum of the stairs, driving him sideways into the rail. The rail held. The man didn't. He went over it with a sound that ended on the processing floor below. The second one was bigger and smarter and had a weapon up. Ji-won went inside the weapon's reach, which was the only place to go, and it was ugly, and it cost him. An elbow to the side of his head that lit his vision white, and a knee to his thigh that buckled his left leg for 2 steps. But he got the weapon pointed at the ceiling, and then at the wall, and then out of the man's hands, and then it was over. He stood at the top of the stairs, breathing through his mouth, his vision coming back from white to normal, the side of his head hot, and the throb of it already setting in. He pressed his hand to the stair rail for 2 seconds, breathed. Then he pushed the office door open. Choi Ryujin was standing at the window. He was 60 years old and built like someone who had been hard all his life and intended to stay that way. Silver-haired, broad through the shoulders, with a face that had the carved quality of a man who had spent decades in rooms where being read could get you killed and had trained every muscle of his expression into controlled surfaces. He turned when Ji-won came through the door with the specific unhurried quality of a man who had expected this and had spent the waiting time deciding how it would go. 2 more men in the room, positioned. Ji-won clocked them without looking directly. Right side near the wall, left side near the desk. You came, Choi said. In Korean. The voice was exactly as the phone call had delivered it, unhurried, certain. You knew I would. Ji-won came fully into the room. His vision was clear. His leg was functioning. The side of his head was going to be a problem tomorrow. I knew you would because you don't leave your people. Choi looked at him with something that was almost respect. Your father had that quality too. It made him easy to predict. Don't. Don't what? Choi's voice was steady. You know what I'm going to tell you. You've known for 11 years. You've just been very good at not looking at it. Ji-won said nothing. Your father came to me, Choi said, 22 years ago. He was building something and he needed backing, and I gave it to him. We were partners. He paused. Until he decided the partnership was worth less than the operation. Until he decided that removing me would simplify his structure. A pause. He was wrong about that. And what he built, what you then rebuilt from the pieces, that's mine, Kang Ji-won. I've been patient, but it was always going to come to this. The room was very still. Jiwan looked at the man who had spent 22 years building toward this moment, who had placed Lena 4 months ago, who had engineered the restaurant, the alias leak, the building breach, Taesung's capture, who had come to Tokyo personally because this was not a business operation. This was a conclusion. Incheon, Jiwan said. Incheon is incidental. Choi's voice was flat. Incheon is the thing I let you chase while I built what I actually needed. He moved away from the window. One step. Then another. The two guards shifted with him. What I actually needed was you here, in this room, with enough of your structure already compromised that the conversation we're about to have is the only one available. Jiwan felt the geometry of the room shift. The two guards moving with Choi, the door behind him, the window, the desk between them. He ran it. And the number came up wrong. Two armed men positioned, Choi himself, one weapon on Jiwan's side. The door behind him closed. If this became straight exchange, he was mathematically behind. You built a lot in 11 years, Choi said. He was close now, 10 feet. Your father would have been impressed. He would also have told you that everything you build on a cracked foundation eventually. Jiwan moved, not toward Choi, toward the desk. He crossed the distance in 2 steps and got behind it, and got the desk between himself and the right side guard's line of fire, and the weapon up and pointed at Choi's center mass, all in one motion that cost him another burst of pain from the leg, but which repositioned the geometry of the room into something that was still bad, but was different bad. Tell them to put it down, Jiwan said. Choi looked at him, at the weapon, at the desk. He almost smiled. You'd shoot me. Tell them. And then what? You walk out of a building with 4 of my men between you and the street, and your people are either gone or... His phone went. Not Jiwan's phone, Choi's phone, in his jacket, buzzing with the specific insistence of a call that someone was not stopping on. Choi's expression changed. A small thing, a crack in the controlled surface. Jiwan watched it. Answer it, Jiwan said. Choi reached into his jacket, slowly, watching Jiwan watch him, and pulled out the phone, looked at the screen. His jaw tightened. Answer it, Jiwan said again. Choi answered. Put it on speaker because he was a man who didn't let information be controlled by others, even when the information was bad. The voice on the other end was low and even and completely unhurried. Jiwan had heard it before. One time, briefly, on a call that had established a relationship he had maintained at careful distance for 2 years. A relationship he was cashing in right now entirely and would never be able to use again. Mr. Choi, said the voice. My name is Watanabe. I represent certain interests in this city that have an arrangement with Mr. Kang. I'm calling to let you know that your vehicle outside the Tsukiji facility was just towed. Your men on the South Dock have been detained by individuals you don't want to argue with, and the 2 men you have positioned inside that office are about to receive a strong suggestion to put their weapons on the floor. A pause. Tonight is a night where everyone walks away. The alternative involves consequences that would interfere with several legitimate operations that nobody in this room wants interfered with. Another pause. Do you understand me, Mr. Choi? Silence. The right side guard looked at Choi. The left side guard looked at Choi. Choi looked at Jiwan. I had a phone in my penthouse, Jiwan said, pre-loaded. 1 number. I told the person with me to take it. He held Choi's gaze. She made a call an hour ago. Something moved in Choi's face. Calculation. Reassessment. The specific recalibration of a man who has planned exhaustively and has discovered a variable he did not account for. A nurse from Atlanta with a preloaded phone and the specific survival instinct of someone who ran toward problems instead of away from them. Choi ended the call. He looked at the 2 guards. He nodded once. They put the weapons on the floor. The room decompressed slowly, the way rooms did after the moment passed. The specific deflation of potential energy that had been coiled and was now unevenly releasing. Jiwan lowered his weapon, did not put it away. Choi looked at him with the expression of a man who had been playing a long game and had just watched the board change. This isn't finished, Choi said. No, Jiwan said. But tonight it is. He backed to the door, opened it, kept Choi in his sight line. What my father did, Jiwan said from the doorway. That's between him and you. He's been dead for 11 years. Whatever he built and whatever he cracked and whatever he owed, that's his. He held Choi's gaze. I built what I built. You want to come at what I built? We do that in the open, not through planted people and midnight deadlines and men taken from buildings. His voice was very steady. Not like this. Choi said nothing. Ji-won went down the stairs. He went through the processing floor and out through the north walkway and into the cold air of the waterfront and the smell of salt water and the sound of the city running its indifferent lights across the dark. Kwon was at the vehicle. Taesung was in the back seat, upright, alive, with Zoraya's hands moving across his forearms, checking circulation, and his face carrying the expression of a man who had decided to be fine and was working on making that true. She was talking to him in the low professional voice, the one that was steady regardless of the situation, and she had the medical bag open on the seat beside her, and she had already gotten an IV line into his left arm from somewhere Ji-won hadn't expected. She looked up when Ji-won reached the vehicle. Her eyes went to the side of his head, to his leg, to the way he was holding his left arm slightly away from his body. Get in, she said. I need to look at you. He got in. The door closed. The vehicle moved. Tokyo received them back into itself. The lights, the traffic, the indifferent beauty of a city that had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. And in the back of a moving car on the Tsukiji waterfront road, Zoraya Bennett put two steady hands on either side of Ji-won's face and looked at the damage with the full concentrated weight of someone who had made it her life's work to assess what could be fixed and what couldn't. The head is a bruise, she said. You're concussed. The leg? Functional. That's not what I asked. Bruised, not broken. She looked at him for a moment longer. Her hands were still on his face, not gently, the way someone emotional holds a face, but deliberately, the way someone checks for damage. And then the deliberateness shifted, just slightly, into something else, and she became aware of her own hands at the same moment. He became aware of them, and neither of them moved for a seeing. Her hands were still on his face. Neither of them moved for 3 full seconds, which was long enough for the space between them to become something that had a name, even if neither of them said the name out loud. The vehicle moved through the Tsukiji waterfront streets, and Kwon kept his eyes on the road with the practiced discipline of a man who had learned when not to see things. And in the back seat, Zoraya became aware of her own hands, and Ji-won became aware of them at the same moment, and she pulled them back slowly and returned to the medical bag and the work. The concussion needs monitoring, she said. Her voice was level, professional. You need to stay awake for the next 4 hours minimum. I'll manage. You'll manage with me watching you. She looked at him directly. That's not a suggestion. He looked at her, said nothing, which was agreement. Tae-sung, in the corner of the back seat, with the IV line in his arm, and a thermal blanket Zoraya had produced from somewhere around his shoulders, looked at both of them with the specific expression of a man who had been in a cold room for 7 hours and had emerged to find the world had shifted in ways he was still calculating. He said nothing either, but his eyes moved between them once and then settled on the window, and something in the set of his face was different from what it had been before the fish market. They drove north through the city. At the penthouse, Zoraya ran proper assessments on both of them. Tae-sung first, systematically, the IV repositioned and 2 additional lines of saline run through while she checked his core temperature and his extremities and talked to him in the low professional voice about what she was finding and what it meant. He had hypothermia, mild but real. She had him on his feet and moving within 20 minutes, walking slow circuits of the living room while she watched his gait and checked his responses. Ji-won sat on the couch and let her work, and watched Tae-sung walk and thought about what Tae-sung had said in the cold room. He worked for your father. He had not thought about his father in 3 years. He had been deliberate about that. His father was a chapter that had been closed, sealed, filed in a part of his history that he had decided did not need to be reopened because opening it would require him to look at things he had built his entire adult life on top of. And the architecture of what he'd built was functional, and he had not wanted to test the foundation. Choi had just tested it for him. When Zoraya came to him, he sat still and let her check the concussion, pupils, tracking, responses, and let her clean the abrasion on the side of his head where the elbow had connected, her hands moving with the same efficient impersonality she gave everything medical. He looked at the wall behind her shoulder and thought. "You're processing something," she said, not a question. "Yes." "Do you want to talk about it?" "No." "Okay." She applied a small dressing to the abrasion with 2 pieces of tape, smoothed it down. "The concussion is moderate. You need 4 hours of monitored wakefulness, and then you can sleep. No alcohol, no—" "I don't drink." She paused, looked at him. Noted. She sat back, looked at his face for a moment longer than clinical necessity required. "What Choi said about your father." He looked at her. "You don't have to tell me," she said. "He was a criminal," Ji-won said, "which is not a surprise. He built an organization in Busan, made a partnership with Choi 22 years ago, and then tried to cut Choi out of it when the operation grew large enough that the partnership felt like a liability." He looked at his hands. "He miscalculated. His organization collapsed. He died 11 years ago when I was 23, and I spent the next 11 years rebuilding from what was left." She was quiet. "Everything I built," he said, "I built in deliberate opposition to how he operated. He was reckless. He trusted too broadly and too fast and didn't verify, and it destroyed him." A pause. "And I trusted Lena for 7 years without verifying, and she dismantled 4 months of operational security and handed Tae-sung to the same man who destroyed my father." He said it flatly, without self-pity, without drama, just the accounting of it. "You're not your father," Zoraya said. "I made the same mistake he did. You made a different mistake for different reasons." She held his gaze. "Your father trusted Choi because it was useful. You trusted Lena because she earned it over 7 years, and then she chose to burn it." She paused. "Those aren't the same thing." He looked at her for a moment. "You're not a therapist," he said. "No?" Something moved at the edge of her mouth. "I'm a trauma nurse. We're trained to tell people the accurate version of what's happening to them, not the version that makes them feel better." She looked at him steadily. "The accurate version is that you got betrayed by someone you had good reason to trust. That's not a character flaw. That's a person making a choice that cost you." He was quiet for a long time. Across the room, Tae-sung had stopped walking and was standing at the window looking out at the city with the thermal blanket still around his shoulders. His back was to them. The city lights were doing what they always did, spreading their indifferent beauty across the dark without any awareness of what moved beneath them. "Tae-sung," Ji-won said. Tae-sung turned. "When you were in that room, the cold room." Ji-won looked at him. "You sent the message to me before you sent anything else." Tae-sung was quiet. "You could have called back. You could have sent coordinates. You sent 4 words to me." "Yes." "Why?" Tae-sung looked at him for a moment with the flat, direct look that had been the same for 9 years and would probably be the same until one of them was in the ground. "Because you were the one who needed to know first," he said, "and because those 4 words were all I had time for before they took the phone." He paused. The last word was the important one. "Run. Not help. Not come. Run." "You thought I might actually run," Ji-won said. "I thought you should have the option." Tae-sung's voice was dry. "You didn't take it." "No. I know." Something moved in Tae-sung's face, brief, controlled immediately. "I know." The room was quiet. Then Tae-sung looked at Zoraya. A long, steady look. The assessing look, the one he gave everything. And then something happened in his face that Ji-won had seen fewer than 10 times in 9 years. Something that was not quite a smile but was in that direction. A fractional softening at the corner of his jaw. A microscopic release of the permanent tension. "She made the call," he said. "Yes," Ji-won said. "The Watanabe call." "Yes." Tae-sung looked at Zoraya for another moment. "I heard it on the phone. In the office." He paused. "When did you call him?" 2 hours before they went to the fish market, she said. "I called as soon as Ji-won left for the office. I thought—" She paused, chose the words carefully. "I thought it was better to have something in place before it was needed than to need it and not have it." "That's exactly right," Tae-sung said. And then, without ceremony and without performance, he looked at Ji-won and said, "Keep her." Jiwon looked at him. I'm saying that as your security advisor, Taesung said. Professionally. He turned back to the window. She thinks ahead. We need more people who think ahead. Zaraya looked at her hands. Something moved in her face, so private, unshared, the specific expression of someone who has just been told something that matters and is deciding what to do with it. The night ran on. At 2 a.m., Baek called with the final accounting. Choi's men in the building had been identified and removed. 3 of them, including Cho Dae-hyun, who had been escorted off the premises by individuals who reported to Watanabe and who did not leave forwarding addresses. The building was clean, the perimeter was clean. Choi's Tokyo operation, without its infrastructure and without the leverage it had spent 4 months building, had no remaining mechanism in the city. Lena was in a room, comfortable, secure, removed from any operational access. What happened next with Lena was a conversation Jiwon was not ready to have tonight, and Baek understood that without being told. The Incheon negotiation was intact. Choi had not moved on it in the last 24 hours. He had been, it turned out, banking everything on the midnight deadline and the fish market. And when those had failed to produce the result he needed, his leverage over Incheon had collapsed with them. The Port Authority contact in Incheon, who had been quietly receiving Choi's inducements for 6 months, had called Baek at 11 p.m. in a state of considerable anxiety and expressed strong interest in honoring the existing arrangement with Jiwon's organization instead. People always honored the arrangement with whoever was still standing. Jiwon listened to all of it, said the necessary things, ended the call. He sat on the couch in the penthouse quiet and felt the full weight of the last 36 hours settle into his body the way exhaustion always settled. Not all at once, but in waves, the adrenaline finally metabolizing and leaving behind the debt it had been running on. The side of his head throbbed. His leg ached with the low, persistent ache of deep bruising. And somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the operational accounting and the physical damage and the specific numbness that came after the crisis point passed, something else. Something quieter and harder to categorize. He had walked into the fish market knowing it was a trap. He had done it because there was no version of himself that left Taesung in a cold room. That was simply true, the way some things were simply true. Not because they were strategic, but because they were fundamental. And the fundamental thing had held tonight, under the worst conditions he could have designed. And it had held because of a phone in a kitchen drawer that a woman he had known for 36 hours had thought to take. He thought about that. He thought about his uncle's dinner reservation, and the false name, and the crystal chandeliers and Zaraya coming through the door 28 minutes late in wrinkled scrubs, looking like the most exhausted, honest person he had ever seen, and asking if he wanted to end the evening right there. He had asked her to sit. He still did not know exactly why. He had told her the night before that he didn't know, that she had come through the door and looked like something he hadn't expected, and he had asked her to sit. That was true as far as it went. But sitting here now in the 2 a.m. quiet, with his head aching and the city still doing its thing outside the glass, he thought he understood it slightly better. She had looked at him with no calculation in it. In 15 years, he could count on one hand the number of people who had looked at him with no calculation in it. Taesung, his uncle. 1 or 2 others, briefly. Calculation was the water he swam in. Every interaction angled, every relationship structured around what could be gained or lost. Every look carrying some assessment of who he was and what he could do for or to the person looking. She had looked at him like he was a person. Exhausted, direct, fully prepared for him to send her away. Looking at him like he was a complicated person, she was deciding whether she had energy for, not a power structure she needed to navigate. He had asked her to sit because some part of him had recognized that, and had wanted, for 1 hour over dinner, to be looked at that way. He heard her come back into the room. She had been in the kitchen. She came back with 2 cups and set one in front of him and sat in the chair across the couch. Not beside him. The chair, the specific distance of someone maintaining a boundary they had decided on thoughtfully. He looked at the cup. Tea. He looked at her. "You should sleep," she said. "The 4 hours aren't up. I'll watch you. You can sleep in the chair." She curled her legs under her. She was still in the clothes from earlier, the dark sweatshirt, the slightly too large pants, and her hair was down, and her face was carrying the specific look of someone who had run on adrenaline for 20 hours and was now in the long, quiet aftermath of it. "I'm not tired yet." He drank the tea. She drank hers. Taesung's asleep, she said. Good. He refused the second IV line. I let it go. She looked at the window. He's going to be fine. The hypothermia was mild. He's strong. A pause. He's very loyal to you? Yes. That's not common. Real loyalty. Not the kind that's held in place by fear or dependency. She looked at her cup. I've seen what that looks like in the hospital. Families in crisis. You can tell very quickly who's there because they want to be, and who's there because they can't figure out how to leave. He looked at her. Which kind are you? She met his eyes. I don't know yet. She said it simply, without deflection. I've known you for 36 hours, and most of them have been an emergency. A pause. Ask me in a week. He looked at her for a long moment. You're planning to stay. I don't know what I am planning. She looked back at the window. I know I can't go back to the hospital yet, which you told me. I know my apartment is under surveillance, which you told me. I know that the situation with Choi isn't finished, not permanently, not the way you both know it isn't finished, which you didn't tell me, but I worked out. She paused. And I know that in 36 hours I have met a man who asked me to sit down when he could have walked away, and did not lie to me again after I asked him not to, and walked into a building that he knew was a trap because he doesn't leave his people. She looked at him. I'm not planning. I'm deciding. There's a difference. He looked at her in the 2 a.m. quiet. The hospital, he said. What about it? I want to find a way to get you back to it. Not immediately. The security situation needs another week, maybe 2, but I want you to be able to go back. He held her gaze. That's something I'm deciding. She was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Tanaka. Beck reached the supervisor this afternoon. She knows you're in a family emergency. Mrs. Tanaka's care team has been briefed specifically with the details you gave me. He paused. She asked about you. According to the supervisor, she said, and I'm told this is a direct quote, she'll come back. That one always comes back. Something moved in Zaraya's face. Deep, real. I was in that room for 7 hours, Taesung said. His voice was level, carefully level. I had time to think. He moved to the chair at the edge of the room, the one farthest from the window, and sat. Choi is not finished. You know that. He told you it isn't finished. He'll go back to Busan and he'll rebuild what he lost tonight, and in 6 months or a year he'll move again, differently, with what he learned about your operation. A pause. Unless we move first. I know. He looked at her for a long time. Sleep, she said. I'll watch. The 4 hours are done. She looked at him steadily. They've been done for 20 minutes. You've been staying awake on stubbornness. A pause. Sleep, Jiwon. I'm here. He closed his eyes. The city moved outside the glass in its slow early morning way. The lights held their positions across the skyline, patient, indifferent, beautiful in the way of things that simply continue regardless of what passes beneath them. In the chair across the room, Zaraya sat with her tea gone cold and watched him sleep with the specific quality of attention that was neither clinical nor personal, but something that had started as one and become the other over 36 hours without either of them steering it. She sat still and watched his breathing even out and watched his face lose the controlled tension that it wore awake, the jaw unclenching, the lines around his eyes releasing, the face becoming briefly the face of a person rather than the face of a position. She thought about Mrs. Tanaka saying that one always comes back. She thought about Dolores and her mother's hand and 40 minutes of silence when silence was what was needed. She thought about the waiter on the floor of the restaurant, the blood spreading fast, and the specific instinct that had moved her toward him while everyone else ran. The instinct that had been with her since she was young and had watched Dolores and had decided that the person who stays was the person she wanted to be. She had stayed. She was still here. She looked at the city outside the glass. Tokyo in the last darkness before dawn, all its light, all its movement, all its complete indifference to the specific lives moving through it. She had been in this city for 14 months, working and adapting and being alone in the particular way of someone far from everything familiar, finding the shape of a life in a place that had not been built for her. She had not expected any of this. She was not certain what any of this was. Not yet. not fully. The man asleep on the couch, or the situation, or the specific version of herself that had emerged from the last 36 hours. The version that had swung a water pitcher without hesitating and mapped a waterfront from a public database and called a number on a preloaded phone because it was the thing that needed doing. She was not frightened of that version. That was the thing she kept coming back to. She had been through the worst of it. The glass and the blood and the cold apartment and the photograph of Lena and the 4 words on a cracked screen and the fish market and the 2 a.m. accounting of all the things that came next. And she was not frightened of herself in it. She was changed. That was simply true. The woman who had walked into Kesho restaurant 28 minutes late with dried coffee on her scrubs, and her whole life organized around shifts and patience and the careful management of a solitude she had been too busy to fully examine. That woman had not walked back out. She did not know yet exactly who had. She knew who was sitting in this chair at 4:45 in the morning, watching a man sleep while Tokyo prepared itself for another ordinary day that had no idea what had happened beneath its lights. She knew that person didn't run from things that needed running toward. She knew that was enough to start with. The first gray light came before the sun did, pressing against the eastern edge of the sky in the patient way of things that would arrive regardless. The city shifted with it, the noise floor rising slightly, the first bird somewhere, a truck on the street below doing something with its hydraulics. The ordinary machinery of morning. Taesung appeared in the hallway at 5:15, dressed now, moving better than he had any right to. He looked at Ji-won asleep, looked at Zaraya, held her gaze for a moment with those assessment eyes. Then he went to the kitchen and she heard him start the coffee. He came back with 2 cups and set one on the table beside her without comment and took the other to the window and stood there looking out at the city coming awake. She picked up the cup. He drank his coffee. She drank hers. They stood and sat in the early morning quiet. The man who had been in the cold room and the woman who had made the call. 2 people who had been pulled into the orbit of the same complicated person from entirely different directions and had ended up in the same penthouse at 5:15 in the morning, watching the same city decide to become a new day. He doesn't trust easily, Taesung said. He was still looking at the window. His voice was low, pitched not to wake Ji-won. I know, she said. It took me 2 years, he said, before he actually trusted me. Not employed me, trusted me. A pause. I'm mentioning that for context. She looked at him. What context? Taesung turned from the window, looked at her directly with the flat, honest look. He trusted you in 36 hours. He paused. That's not a small thing, in case you were wondering whether it was. She was quiet for a moment. I wasn't wondering, she said, but thank you. Taesung nodded, turned back to the window. The sun came over the eastern edge of the city slowly, the way it always did, not dramatically, not announcing itself, just arriving. Light found the glass towers first and spread downward into the streets, and Tokyo received it the way it received everything, without ceremony, without pause, incorporating the new day into its continuous motion as if the night had been nothing more than a brief modulation in something that didn't stop. Ji-won woke at 6:20. He came awake the way she had watched him do everything, not gradually, not through stages, but all at once, from completely still to completely present in a single second. He sat up, looked at the window, looked at Zaraya. You stayed, he said. His voice was rough with sleep. I said I would. She looked at him. How's the head? He pressed 2 fingers to the dressing on the side of his head. Better. He looked at the window, at the light. What time? After 6. He nodded. Sat with his forearms on his knees for a moment, running something through his mind. She could see it, the private accounting, the thing he'd been carrying to sleep and had woken up carrying. Lena, he said. Yes. I have to decide what to do about Lena. Yes. He looked at her. You have an opinion. You're not asking for my opinion. I'm asking. She held his gaze. She made a choice that put people in danger, real danger. The waiter in the restaurant, that was her information that sent those men. Taesung in that room, that was her. She paused. But She's also a person who made that choice inside a structure where the options available to her were probably not as simple as they look from the outside. Another pause. I don't know what options she had or didn't have. I don't know what she was threatened with or promised. She looked at him. Neither do you. Not yet. He was quiet. You need to know the full story before you decide, she said. That's all I have. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, a single decisive nod that absorbed the information and filed it. He picked up his phone from the table, looked at it, set it back down. 3 weeks, he said. To Incheon. Tae-sung told me. It's going to require... He paused. The next 3 weeks are going to require my full attention, the kind of attention that doesn't leave room for much else. She looked at him. I know. You should know what you're staying inside of. His voice was careful, honest in the specific way she had come to recognize, not gentle, not managing her, just direct. It's not going to become something else quickly. This is what it is. I know what it is, she said. I've been in it for 36 hours. I'm not confused about what it is. I'm not talking about the crisis, he said. I'm talking about after. The ordinary shape of it. He looked at the city. This is my life, the structures and the decisions and the things that come with them. That doesn't change. She was quiet for a moment. You're warning me, she said. Yes. Okay. She held his gaze. I'm a trauma nurse in a foreign country who agreed to a blind date because my boss said she'd stop leaving notes on my locker if I went. I don't have a simple life either. She paused. I'm not looking for simple. He looked at her. The morning light came through the glass and found the room and made it ordinary. The couch and the coffee and the city outside and 2 people sitting in it with the full weight of 36 hours between them and something that wasn't simple and wasn't finished and wasn't yet named, but which was present and real and which both of them were choosing, with full knowledge of what it cost. He reached out. His hand found hers on the arm of the chair between the couch and where she sat, and he did not hold it in any demonstrative way, just placed it there, his hand over hers, and let the warmth of it be what it was. She turned her hand over. They sat like that in the morning light, while Tae-sung stood at the window with his coffee and looked at the city and very deliberately said nothing at all. Outside, Tokyo moved into its day. The lights were going off now as the sun took over, tower by tower, the city exchanging its night face for its morning one, with the practiced ease of a place that had been doing this for a very long time and intended to go on doing it regardless of what any particular night had held. The streets filled. The trains ran. Somewhere across the city, a hospital was shifting into its morning routine, and a woman named Mrs. Tanaka was being told that her nurse had not forgotten her and would be back when she could. And somewhere in Busan, a man with silver hair was sitting with the accounting of a lost night and making the calculations that men like him always made. And in a penthouse above a city that had held all its secrets through the dark and was now letting the light have them, a Korean Mafia boss and a Black American nurse sat with their hands turned toward each other and let the morning be what the morning was. Not an ending, not a beginning exactly, something more honest than either. The sun came up over Tokyo and the day began.